Before we dive into more of the panel and kind of the overview as we see it for about the next hour, we're just going to tell you a little bit about ourselves and what we do here at Penn. So as you know, my name is Laura. I have been at Penn for about a year and a half. I serve as an advisor on the college team. So for that, I meet with about students from over 50 plus majors, and we assist students with needs from, figuring out what they want to do with their lives, internships, full-time careers, post-graduation, as well as what goes into preparing for that part. So I'll pass it on over to my colleague, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Megan Chambers. I'm an Associate Director with Career Services who supports Wharton undergraduates and Wharton alum. I've been in my role for just about 2.5 years, and I'm really excited to be here today with my colleagues to further discuss career wellness and how that kind of relates to all of our roles and in our interactions with students. So then I'm going to pass it now along to Zihui.
Hi everyone, I'm Zihui. I'm Zihui Lu. I'm from Wellness at Penn. So I'm very happy today to be part of the panel discussion and talk about career and mental health. So a little self-introduction about myself. I have been working at Penn for a little over 1 year, and I'm a wellness coaching manager. So my responsibility is to establish a new wellness coaching program for Penn students. So the program is offering free and preventive coaching services to Penn students, both undergraduate and graduate students. And the coaching are also offered by students. The students are both undergraduate and graduate students, and they are trained by me, and they started offer coaching since February this year, and they have received very good feedback. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you.
Thanks everyone for your intros. I just want to kind of break down a little bit of the format today. So with the help of my colleagues here, we've sort of divided today's session into 2 categories, and we really wanted to use an alliteration because it just makes everything better. So the first half will be focused on what we call career confusion, right? So different topics that may fall into this are like anxieties around like pressures from parents, right? If they want a student or their child to be doing or pursuing a certain major or career path, right? Nervousness about like if the student feels like their skills align with what they actually want to do and maybe how to present those things in a way that makes sense to them. And then the second half of the session or the panel today will be focused on what we call application anxiety. So this could be anything from like nervousness or anxieties around informational interviewing. It could also include things like not hearing back from employers and some of the discouragement that students might feel about those things, as well as offer negotiation techniques. And again, the apprehension and anxieties that come with getting an offer, because it's great to be excited about that, but there's a lot of nervousness and uncertainty that also comes with those things. So we sort of formatted this by pulling apart different scenarios that we often see with our students. And so I'm just going to paint some pictures for everyone involved today and just ask our panel to speak and comment on these certain scenarios and provide their insights and advice. It's pretty informal, so if you have questions or comments along the way, please feel free to throw that in the chat or use like the hand raise feature, and we can help address those as they come up, but we will have a formal Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so the first scenario, right? You're a freshman or you're working with a freshman, right? And that student is interested in pre-law, pre-med, or something more in like the corporate field. But they're not sure if it's the right path for them. There's a lot of anxiety around choosing a major or academic path correctly, right? And they're feeling like they don't have enough time to do what's required in order to move forward, right? Academically, or to plan for an internship or professional experience. So something that I want our panel to address today is how do we support, right, these students that are feeling a lot of anxiety around choosing something? And I just love my colleague Megan to jump in and get us started today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. I think one of the things that I always recommend to those having these types of conversation is to not jump in and try to offer a solution or try to fix the problem right away. I think a lot of times students, at least the ones I've worked with, really appreciate being heard and validated about their concerns and really making sure that you're allowing them to ask you or opening up the door to what sorts of supports they need, and then using your expertise, whether you're an academic advisor, career services, maybe a professor, wherever it is, to kind of then glean your insight based on what they're kind of looking for. I think sometimes it can be really, as professionals, we just want to fix it, but giving a little bit of that space for that validation for them, I think would be a really great place to start off the conversation.
So is there anything that you'd like to add based on what Megan had said?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also noticed that this is a freshman, so in my coaching sessions, I always tell my students that people usually overestimate how much they can accomplish in 3 months, but underestimate how much they can do in 4 years. So maybe there's a lot of things to do, but if they plan accordingly, they can accomplish so much in the upcoming years. So
Yeah.
just to ease their anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I'd heard that before, but not recently. So it kind of jogged my memory to start using that with students as well, like when I'm having conversations with them. Because you're right. I think many times you have so many goals in mind, right? Or you're trying to help a student walk through different action steps to accomplish a goal or to feel like they're going to accomplish something, right? At the end of whatever their finish line is, if it's the end of the academic year or graduation, that you sort of forget, right? How much or how lofty all of those things can be in such a short period of time. But as a freshman, right, we are able to sort of meet them early on and sort of space out these goals. And by doing that, hopefully we can like simmer, right, some of their anxieties or the stresses that come with meeting those standards.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Laura. And I think just adding on to those 2 points, really just letting them know that what the questions they're asking like are great, and that we appreciate that they're taking the time to meet with us, whoever us is, and just let them know that they can continue to come to whoever it is, to continue to have the conversation if needed, or even so that person may be directing them back to us, but just letting them know like, thanks for asking the question, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, I'd also say too, in thinking about how I might approach a scenario like this, if a student were to come in and they already have sort of this like predetermined track or like some idea of what they want to do. Again, the first session might be building rapport with the student, like asking why, what interests you about these things, just so you can get to know them a little bit more and figure out what their goals are. But I also think that having a conversation with the student when they're ready, letting them know that this does not define you, right? So just because you think you might want to do pre-law, right, or become a lawyer someday or go into medicine, doesn't mean that you have to follow that track from day one, right? Maybe history interests you, or maybe government interests you, right? And how do we leverage the skill set that we might gain from pursuing that academic course or exploring internships in those fields to do eventually what you see yourself doing, right? And also providing the perspective that life is almost never the same, right? What I thought I'd be doing when I graduated college is not what I'm doing now, right? And honestly, that's for the better, right? Because through every experience in your life, you figure out who you are and what you want to do, and your goals become a little bit more centered, right? So encouraging this idea of exploration too, I think is really important and really helpful with the students we serve here at Penn that often come in with like a pre-prescribed notion of what they think that they should be doing, right?
Yes, I think that's a very good point to invite the students to explore. I remember when I was in college, there was a conversation from like my teacher. They told me that it's like connecting the dots maybe you're doing something totally irrelevant from your future, but in the future it might all connect together. So there's no wasted experience. So you don't have to settle everything so early.
Absolutely. Megan, anything to add before I talk through our next scenario?
I think the only thing to also add, if there's space for it in the conversation, if it's welcomed by the student, to also, to your point, Laura, to add on a little bit about your perspective and letting them know, like, hey, I'm XYZ at Penn. Maybe that was what you wanted to do, but maybe it wasn't. So seeing if they're open to kind of hearing how you've navigated those own career changes in your own life, if they feel like they have the space for it, I think could also be something that's added on.
Yeah, I see a question in the chat from one of our very own Joseph Barber. How do students pace out the goals when they feel with absolute certainty that everyone else around them is making more progress faster, when that is probably not the case at all? So I think that's a really good question, right? And, we talk a lot about like everything is student specific, right? Like what can they handle when they come into a meeting with you, right? Is the first meeting de-escalation, or are they feeling really ready to jump into creating a plan that makes sense for them? So, I think it's difficult to know without really determining what that first meeting looks like for them. But I often find myself having conversations around like, what do you feel like your peers are doing better or faster than you? And many times they can't even name, right, what those like things are that their peers are doing. They're like, oh, they're like interviewing. Oh, they've already applied everywhere. And I'm like, where's everywhere? And they don't have a lot of like details about that sort of thing, right? They're just sort of hearing about like other students supposedly doing these things and internalizing it and then feeling like they're supposed to be doing those things too, right? So I can walk them through the facts that I have, right? The timelines that I understand in terms of careers, maybe even provide like a sample plan of action, right? How I often view things pretty typically is, career exploration, execution of documents, informational interviewing, pre-networking, and then preparing for interviews and applying, right? So there is a timeline and there's kind of an action item list that we have in place. But it's sort of how do we address those concerns as they come in, and why are those concerns actually present in the first place? And then if we feel it's appropriate, providing that list for them, and sort of kind of laying out their timeline based on their interests, right? Anyone else have anything to add?
No, that's great, Laura. I think with my students, I absolutely do similarly. And then I also like to remind them that often what they're hearing is what I call the vocal minority. So yeah, of course you're going to hear about students who already have something, have already done something. Like, of course, those students are going to be talking a lot about it to everyone, because they're excited, they're proud of it. But again, that's a vocal minority, and reminding them to just kind of take a look around and be like, of course, those students, you're going to hear from it. But think about all of your larger friend groups and friend groups outside of that. You're probably not going to hear about people who are struggling as much. And just to give them a little bit of that perspective when they feel like everyone's doing everything better than they are, just kind of reminding them that that's not really the case, similar to what you do with gathering those data points.
Yeah, absolutely. Zoe, I feel like the next scenario is really tailor-made for your expertise. So, meeting with students that are feeling this parental pressure to do something or to pursue a certain academic or career-oriented track. How do you have tough conversations with students, either like coaching them of how to talk to their parents, or maybe people in their lives that are sort of pushing them to pursue something specifically?
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. And if I meet with a student with parental pressure to pursue a certain track, maybe at the beginning we can explore some possibilities. Like, if you don't like the career track your parents give you, what career track do you want to pursue? Have a clear idea what you want to do in the future. If you know you want to do, maybe you can get involved with some relevant campus clubs to get a feel for it. For example, maybe you want to be a filmmaker, but maybe try that for some time and see if you really like it. And also maybe you can also do some informational interview, and you find some people who are already doing the things you want to do, and invite them over for coffee and ask for their experience. I'm sure most people are happy to help out. So after the exploration phase, if you are very certain that you don't want to be a doctor, you want to be a filmmaker, then it's a time for communication with your parents. So before you start the communication, I really want to set the students in the right mindset. Don't try to put your parents on the opposite direction. They probably don't hate you. They want you to be well. They want best for you. So start a conversation with the mindset of calmness, love, and the intention to understand each other. And there's a communication technique that I really like. It's called nonviolent communication. So there are 4 steps for the nonviolent communication. The first step is called observation, which you just share what you have observed, the fact, with no feeling, with no thought, no interpretation. And the second step is talk about your feelings, how that fact make you feel. Again, that's your feeling. You're not accusing anyone. You're free to tell them what you feel. And the third step is to talk about what you need from this communication from that person. And the last step is to make a request based on your need. So for example, in this scenario, if your parents really want you to study medicine, but you don't want to, you may start a conversation like, Mom, Dad, I know you really want me to choose the pre-med track and apply for medical school. So that's the observation. This makes me feel bad to disappoint you and also feel powerless. This is how you feel. I need to be able to make career decisions by myself. I need to feel independent and powerful to choose the career path that I like. That's the needs. And the last step is a request, is could you allow me to explore my careers at my own pace and trust me to make my own decisions? So this is a whole nonviolent communication process, but be aware that maybe it won't work in the first time. It may take several rounds of communications. So just be patient with your parents and with yourself. And last but not least, you can always look for your community on campus, such as Patch, as like the La Casa Latina and Macu. I'm sure you will find other students with similar situations and you can support each other. So yeah, that's what I think. Do you have any additions?
I mean, honestly, that was so well said. I feel like I'm trying to imprint that in my brain and talk to my parents using that model from now on. Because, you know, in my opinion, I think many times when we're listening, we're often just trying to figure out what we want to say in response, and we're not really like internalizing what that other person is saying. And I think these career conversations can be really hard for students to have with their parents, especially when they're feeling like there's expectations, whether it's self-imposed or external. So I really appreciated your communication. I think it was called the nonviolent communication model. So that was great. Megan, anything else before we move on to our next scenario?
No, I just want to point out, one of our colleagues, Joseph Barber, did put a link to a summary of the communication method that was mentioned, if anyone wants to grab that before we move on. Oh,
I think there is a quick comment.
Yeah.
You want to read that out loud, Megan?
Sure. There's a very fine line between parental pressure and parental guidance, right? In some families and cultures, parental input into a student's future is highly valued and expected. In other families and cultures, that kind of input can be disputed more easily. How should we suss out this difference and thus not make our own assumptions about the parent-child dynamic?
Wow, that's a really good question. I'm gonna throw us away on spot right now and see if she might have a more articulate answer to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think every culture, even every family is different. So I think it's important for us as the student counselor or staff not to assume that, not to take side, but really be curious and listen to in the conversation and see. Also, we don't offer our opinions most time. We just try to help the students to explore their opinions. So I think that's more important. That's not about what we think.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not using our opinions, but helping them explore their own. So I hope that addresses the question, and thank you, Esther, for providing some information about other sources that could help us navigate these difficult conversations. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to move through to our next scenario. And this is really about a student feeling like their skills and their interests are not aligned, maybe with what they want to do, right? So you're meeting with the student and they feel that their extracurriculars, their coursework, major technical skills, what have you, right, don't align necessarily with their desired pathway, career pathway. So how do we talk to them a little bit about transferable versus relevant skills and what they might be qualified for? Megan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of have the perspective or the lens that I try to bring to appointments with students that pretty much any role you have had, whether it be leadership in a club in high school or being on a committee here at Penn, or maybe being a hostess at a restaurant or being a camp counselor over the summer, all of those experiences have some sort of transferable skill. So the first thing that I like to do when I meet with students is first kind of ask them what is making them feel like they're not qualified. What skills do they feel like they're lacking? And of course, this would, pertain to whatever career path they're interested in. And then just kind of work from there through their resume and experiences and kind of provide that perspective that, hey, you were camp counselor last summer. There's a lot of really great transferable skills there. Let's say you're interested in consulting, and go through some of those things. So as a camp counselor, you definitely had some sort of curriculum implementation or implementing a plan for your activities. You had to have some project management. You had to work with your other team members and kind of talk them through each of those to understand that just because it's not a role in that industry that you're interested about doesn't mean that there's not transferable skills that you can take from that, represent those on your resume, which is something career services can help with, and have that kind of articulate what you're able to do. And then of course, to think about those transferable skills in with what the relevant skills needed for the role is, and kind of start from there as a starting point. I don't know if anyone else wants to add on.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I had this example actually happen pretty early on when I started here at Penn, and so I hold on to this experience and use it as like a story whenever I can with other students. I had a student come in that was really interested in pursuing a role in social media for an internship over the summer, and I believe they were a sophomore at the time, and to this point, they had only had lab and research experience. So they came in and they were like, oh, I saw this role. I believe it was like at Paramount or it was in the entertainment field. And I think it looks really cool, but I don't think I'm qualified for it. And so we spent the remainder of the session that we had together really talking about their responsibilities and the skills and experiences that they've had working in a lab. And so just to kind of draw very broadly, right? So they had a research experience where they designed a survey, deployed the survey, was able to put the results into meaningful and visually appealing like graphs and charts, and then they presented on their findings, right? And so we talked a lot about what pieces of that experience in their research would directly apply or transfer, right, to this new role in social media. And maybe it was collecting and analyzing the data, right? Maybe it was creating those visually appealing charts and graphs, right? Maybe we don't need the part of creating the survey, right? So sometimes it's not all about putting every single responsibility and pieces of impact that you had in previous roles and experiences, but really zeroing in on and capitalizing on the roles and responsibilities as they directly relate or can be transferred into this new role, right? So that's, we talk a lot about like tailoring our documents, right? So that's one of the main conversations I have with students, like what pieces of our experience are directly relevant and transferable into what we're applying for. So I hope that was helpful. So do you have anything to add to this particular scenario?
I think that's it. I totally agree with what you said, the transferable skills. And it just occurred to me that I read many stories about like stay-at-home mom went back to work and they're managing their family, their kids. That's totally transferable. So it's just kind of irrelevant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting perspective. I think we have another question. Do you think students don't think they have skills or just don't think their skills are good enough? That's interesting. I would say generally it's the good enough part that I see, right? It's like, I know Spanish, but it's like basic, or I know Python, but I've taken like one class or had one experience using it. I think generally it's like, I feel like I am familiar with something, but could I execute on a project fully or implement that skill to the level that they're looking for? My perspective is like, let the employer decide, right? If your skill is qualified or good enough, right? Because I think you're your own worst critic. And many times you've used that skill, whether it be a platform or a soft skill, right? In many different ways. And you don't really realize that. So that would be my perspective on it. If anything else wants to add something.
Yeah, I would agree. I think to just a second point, a little bit of imposter syndrome. Definitely most of the time they do recognize they have skills that might, looking at a job posting, looking at their skills, how they're represented on their resume. Yeah, they might be like, yeah, I know I have these, but is it good enough? I'm competing with XYZ amount of people who are also super competitive. How do I know I'm competitive enough? So just reassuring them in that moment. But I do think to the first part of that question, that there are students who maybe not necessarily don't think they have the skills, but aren't sure how to articulate or discover what skills they have from past experiences that they don't feel like is directly transferable to what they're pursuing. So to that first point, I think sometimes, yes, students might not know how to identify the skills they have from certain experiences that aren't directly related to what they want to do. And also, once those skills are identified, they feel like those might not be good enough.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions, Joseph. It's just popcorning us with the really good ones today. So for our next and final scenario under career confusion, say you're meeting with the student that's feeling unsupported by a staff member or an advising staff member, and they don't feel like they understand like their career journey or their wants or needs. How do we prevent this, right, as career advisors or other staff members ourselves, right? And how do we approach conversations with students with empathy and individualization? So I'm going to have Zawai kick us off. Yeah.
So I think I like to approach the scenario with the concept of coaching because that's what I do. So for those of you who maybe not familiar with coaching, it's a partnership between the coach and the coachee. It's a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires people to maximize their personal and professional potentials. Actually, at the SALT conference a few weeks ago, 3 colleagues from the career services presented a session about coaching. I really enjoyed that session, and it really shows that coaching is a powerful tool for career explorations. So you might be wondering, how is a coaching conversation different from a regular conversation? As we know that everyone has their own beliefs, own opinions. It's totally fine to express your opinions in a private setting, but if you're working with students, it may create bias and make them feel judged, feel uncomfortable. So we want to, in a coaching conversation, we want to use the coaching mindset, which is open, curious, flexible, and client-centered. So being open means that the student can have their own different opinions from me. That's totally okay. So be open to whatever they say. And curiosity is also very important here. So we need to have the mindset that I want to understand the student completely in front of me. I want to ask them questions, not because I'm gossiping, but because I really want to better understand them. And my questions will help the student to clear their thoughts and come up with the best solutions by themselves. So we know that sometimes we tell them what to do, but they just couldn't do that because it's not from them. But instead, if they come up with the solutions by themselves, then they are more likely to do that because they have the agency. So a lot of times they don't need to be told what to do, but they just need a mirror, a soundboard, and a thinking partner. So that's what we can do as a coach or as a advisor. So we can help them to figure out solutions by themselves without tell them what we think.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate your insight there. It sounds like we have a lot of questions that are currently filling up in the Q&A block that relate to a lot of what we've talked about in terms of this career confusion. So I'm going to have Michael jump in and just provide us some questions that we can answer.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, we got a lot of great questions in the Q&A. So let's go through a couple of them here. We've touched on some of them, but maybe we can do a little bit more of a deep dive on some of these. So the first question I'm going to share is, are there ways that we can help students navigate having numerous job offers at once and the stresses involved with that? That's what we call a good problem.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you actually stole one of our scenarios for under application anxiety. So this is a great question to have. I think, yes, we would consider that a good problem, right? But for many students, this poses kind of like a crisis of identity. Like, what do I really want to do? Now, if we imagine that all of these internships or job offers are like the same in terms of like criteria, like PTO, location, salary, right? And all of these things are kind of the same across a standard. And the only difference here is the type of role, right, that they would be pursuing. Because there's a lot of factors that go into students making decisions that make sense for them, right? But in terms of like figuring out what they really want, I think it really just boils down to an honest and come to Jesus conversation with them about what they feel happiest doing, right? And sometimes that doesn't align with what they thought it did. So, you know, if you're taking someone that was working in a lab that thought they were always going to pursue something in like the health track or research track or translational medicine, and then they really decide, you know, that's fine, right? But I think that this would be a cool part of my life or a cool adventure, right, to dive into, right? Encouraging them to pursue what they thought maybe wasn't, right, going to be their career trajectory. In terms of like making difficult decisions though, when things aren't aligned in terms of criteria for the job, right? It's really making them aware of those different pieces to evaluate, right? So many times students come in and they don't know how to ask questions about retirement, health benefits, time off, sick days, right? Are they close to their family? Is this in a faraway location? Do they have to travel for their job? Right? So asking them questions and helping them to understand what these offers mean can often shine a light on what they actually want to do and choose anyways. Anything else to add?
No, I completely agree. And to the earlier point, it's just being there as a sounding board for them, helping them identify these things they could consider. But oftentimes in those types of meetings with students, they will push you to make the decision for them. And you have to say, like, I can help, identify the things that we should think about, how to ask your employer about these questions. But ultimately, this decision falls on you. I cannot make that for you. And just being that sounding board.
And I also want to add that when making difficult decisions, it's very important to know about your core values. So there are some value exercise online that you can answer questions, and they will tell you what's your top 5 core values, whether it's family or financial stability, health, etc. So when you're clear about the core values, then maybe it's easier for you to decide which job to choose.
All right, fantastic. Thanks. We got another great question here. What are some of the best tips to share with students on how to network when they feel they don't have connected parents or an established network?
Yeah, that is kind of one of our other scenarios under application anxiety. So that's another, I guess, great transition. We're kind of moving through these for time. I think something that I encourage students, and of course, obviously, happy to hear other thoughts on the panel, is to first start with their immediate network, which is their friends at Penn, their immediate friend group. Look around, like, are your friends and you all doing the same thing? Are they involved in different extracurriculars? What did they do for their summer experiences? Can you speak to them first? Do they have a friend or an upperclassman that maybe would be willing to speak to you about their experience? And then from your like inner circle, kind of moving up to then like professors that you may have had a relationship with or connection with, can you go and speak to them about their career path or a potential industry, and then slowly start to get wider and wider and wider from there to the point where you're getting to maybe using the My Penn directory to reach out to alum, and we're helping them craft that email, what to say, how to set expectations, how to go about that in an organized way. But oftentimes I encourage students to just kind of focus on their Penn network first. Like, who do they know in their friend group? Who do their friends know? What clubs are their friends in? What clubs are they in? Are there upperclassmen through those clubs, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that kind of gets that conversation off. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I would sort of, just to clarify, right, when you're talking about like your Penn network, right, I would consider all these people the warm leads, right?
Yes.
So even like through My Penn, right, if you're reaching out to alum and generally you have that Penn to Penn connection, the chances of you hearing back and establishing fruitful relationships with them are really, I think they skyrocket, right, in terms of like cold calling or reaching out to people that work at a certain organization but don't necessarily have an established relationship with you. You have to really make it clear, right, why they're going to spend their time interacting and networking with you. Not to say it can't be done, but it can often be more difficult to establish those relationships. I would say this, right? Unless you want to do the exact same thing your parents are doing, many times, even if you have parents that we would consider like well-connected, or you might even, or a student considers well-connected, right? It may not have the connection or the network that you're hoping to explore, right? If your parents are in medicine, but you want to work in film, right? They may not have that relationship already established, right? So I would heavily advise that like they come into career services and talk to us a little bit about networking 101, right? Many times it's just the anxiety around networking. Like, I don't know what to say. I hate small talk, right? Sometimes international students are a little concerned with small talk as well, right? If I show up to an in-person networking meeting, how is that even supposed to go? Do I bring my resume or is that too forward, right? So a lot of times when you address this and then you show them concrete areas where networking can be available to them in a less stressful environment, they'll find, right, that they're building these meaningful relationships on their own. And it's no longer about relying on parents or friends or things like that, right? They have the confidence they can do that on their own. And they'll pass it on one day too, right? So it's the whole idea of like, you give back, you help the next one in line.
Well, I know we covered this fairly in depth already, but there are 2 or 3 questions still about helping students navigate parental expectations. And the way this one is phrased, I particularly resonated with me, which is how do we encourage students that it is safe to explore careers when they have external pressures like family or other expectations for what their career looks like. So how can we as staff at the University of Pennsylvania help students with that exploration piece? We talked a lot about how you can have those conversations with the parents or the influences in your life that are setting those expectations. But how can we help them navigate that exploration piece as well?
Well, I think we have a lot of opportunities on campus, right, that are not to be missed. Our on-campus recruiting suite has a lot of employers that come to campus. So also it's like looking at the low-hanging fruit. What's there? Like who's on campus that you can just walk into an information session on a Monday at 7 p.m. and just meet someone else, right, to learn a little bit about an industry. We also just have a lot of resources, right? My Pen career shift. We can teach you how to use LinkedIn strategically to find those informational interviewing partners. And of course, it's the way I was saying, right? Can you get involved with the club on campus? That gives you some insight into what marketing would be like day to day, right? As well as maybe take leadership roles in group projects, right? Where you can perfect or establish, research skills, right? To understand what that actually looks like when it plays out. So I think all of those different avenues are really good for career exploration, and then determining what you actually want before maybe you dive into those tougher conversations, right? So you feel like you have a leg to stand on, right? Like I tried this, and it worked or it didn't work for these reasons. Anyone else?
I also like to, with these conversations with my student, is direct students to our student outcomes data, which is freely available on the Career Services website. Anyone can access it. And what that's really helpful is one of my wonderful colleagues, Emily, puts together these reports where we see where students have gone with their first destination after Penn. Thank you, Michael, for posting that there. And that can be a really good starting point, to Laura's point, to kind of gather some data to back yourself up going into some of those. So for example, if you were interested in this example, like film, you can search for other students from the year 2022 who were at the college or were in, or maybe even sees what their concentration was and see where exactly they went, and even more so see what their job function is. So this has been really helpful when students are entering that exploration process to see if something's even quote unquote like possible or what other Penn students have done. And I always say this is not the be all end all report, but it's a good starting point to just gather some data for yourself to not only help inform yourself, but potentially to then share with a parent or another trusted family member that might be wanting them to do something else or not totally understand what that student is wanting to do. So I think that's a great resource that everyone can utilize in those conversations. Michael, you're muted.
Muted myself. This is a great segue into the last question in the queue, which I think also relates to outcomes and our reporting. The question is, a lot of students share stress about their friends already having offers when they have none, but they are in vastly different industries. Any advice on how to discuss different timelines with students to help normalize their process?
Yeah, I sure do. And I really just want to give a shout out to our colleague Emily Borelli, who put together these reports. Even just clicking, does everyone have access to the link that Michael shared?
It should be in the chat for everyone, yeah.
Okay, great. So even just clicking on that link and hitting on the interactive undergrad reports, which is on the first column, right? It's highlighted in kind of this like red font. You can scroll through that and see the information that's displayed in terms of like salary, industry, job function, things like that, right? And you can prioritize based on school or major concentration. But you can also click into the interactive employer, industry, and job function report, which will give you a timeline, right, of when students receive their offers, right? Now, Yeah, every year this might change slightly. Things might get pushed back or pushed forward, but this is the best data we have to help advise students on when to expect, right? Certain industries to peak, right? Or if they're really concerned that there's not a lot of jobs being posted, why that might be, right? So it allows us to make predictions for future years and future cycles of these application processes, right? It's also important to note too that some jobs don't have a timeline, right? It's posted as needed, right? They might be looking for a social media manager and it just might become available in January, when most of the time these are typically posted in March or April, right? So we point students to this to help reduce anxiety and set expectations, but also telling them it's okay to look, right? We have ways that they can have internships and jobs sent to them, right? They can create their own sort of parameters and filters around having handshake emails sent to them. And also just to keep looking and to keep networking, because you never know where opportunities might come. But I do think that this is an excellent resource, and happy to walk anyone through how to use this if they were not able to find the industry and job function report.
Yeah, that's great, Laura. I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Thank you so much for sharing this wonderful tool. I will definitely share that with the students I work with. So also talking a little bit about from the mental health perspective, a lot of our happiness comes from comparing with other people. So I know sometimes it's helpful to know about other people's information so that you can make decisions, but sometimes it's just causing anxiety. So when you feel that you have got enough information, then maybe it's time to focus on your own job seeking and try not to care too much about other people's progress.
All right, well, we have cleared out the Q&A for now. If folks have other questions, feel free to put them in there and we'll address them in the last couple of minutes. But Laura, I'm gonna put you back in the driver's seat.
Yeah, I mean, we did hit on 2 of the 4 of our scenarios that we had pre-planned. So I think that just means your questions were great and very much in alignment with the topics we wanted to hit. So I'm going to jump to the second scenario that we had prepared. And this is about like, you're meeting with the student who sent in what they say is like 1 million applications, right? They're applying everywhere. And they haven't heard back from one single person, right? They're feeling a loss of hope. They're feeling kind of despair about the application process, and they're even questioning their worth, right? Like, am I good enough to work anywhere? How do we kind of reframe their mindset and their approach to applying for positions? And I'd love to start off with Zoe talking through some strategies to combat application fatigue.
Yeah, this is also very common. So first, maybe you can share the statistics with the students. We know that a lot of times a single job posting can easily receive hundreds of applications. So we can see that the success rate is really low. So just share the information with the students. Maybe it will help them to have a bigger perspective. And also a mindset that's very helpful in this situation is called self-compassion. So self-compassion is a pretty popular recent years. It's about how you be more compassionate with yourself. So you probably have for students who have sent 1 million applications but haven't received any results, they probably have a lot of negative self-talks during this process. So the self-talks might be something like, you're worthless, you're a failure, you will never get a job. So having those self-talk is not helpful at all. It will only make you exhaust you even more. So with self-compassion, you can think about how would you tell your best friend or your loved one if they have the same situation. You will probably say something like, oh, don't be frustrated. This happens. This is a very normal process. So try to say those things to yourself. instead of beating yourself up. So I really want the students to practice having self-compassion to themselves if this difficult situation happens. Also, another suggestion is to allow themselves to take a break. As you see that when their efforts are not working, it's a natural tendency to try even harder, run faster, such as applying for even more positions and staying up late night to find job postings. This can be incredibly counterproductive, and it's always better to stop for a few days. Nobody will die if you take a break for a few days. And after you take a break, when you come back, maybe you will have a fresh pair of eyes and to look at your job application strategies. Maybe you will have some new approach.
Yeah, no, that absolutely 1,000,000% agree. I think something I would like to add on, and what I do with my students in these moments is to your point, you know, be that listening, that sounding board, validate that yes, it is frustrating, like that you get it. Maybe you can share that you've been there if you have. But I also like to kind of dig in with them. Again, this depends on the student, but a little bit more about, okay, so you're saying you're getting nothing. Does that actually mean nothing? Does that mean you applied and heard back for a first round, but it wasn't the ones you wanted? Is this, we're not even getting to the first round? Are we maybe getting all the way to a final round or a super day and not getting anything? So first I like to kind of just identify and ask them just questions to help inform the advice that I might share after validating that, yes, this is a frustrating process, because I think that also helps the students visualize and get it down, something like data that they can see and be like, okay, so I feel like no one's gotten back to me, but let me like look, okay, so let me write every place that I can remember. Maybe I applied, let's start there. Let's see, you know, how far did I get in the process? Did I hear back from no one? Did I at least get a phone screen, and kind of break down there? So then we can also help them if they feel like after they come back maybe from taking a break, we can be like, okay, so let's think about this. You've gotten screening interviews for these positions and not these positions. So let's think about why you may have gotten them for these positions. Like, how can we maybe tailor your resume for these other ones? Or how can we work on maximizing your time on a phone screen so that you do start to move forward to other rounds, and really kind of pick apart what that means when they feel like everything's falling apart around them. Like, what does everything mean? What do they mean when they tell you that? And then how can we start to address that as needed?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think I'm going to send all my students to Steve's away before they come and see me. I take a pretty structured approach when working with students that are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of applications that they've sent out. I always like to think of application in two ways, right? Or like take this two-pronged approach. One is just like send it out there, see what sticks, right? You don't have time always to tailor your resume, cover letter, etc., right, to every single job. Sometimes you just see something and it's like the deadline's in an hour and you're like, okay, like if this lands, great, because why not? Go for it, right? Sometimes, right, with planning and being in the right mindset, you have a lot more time to strategize effectively how you're going to apply for positions to put yourself maybe in a better position to get them. So if the issue at hand here is really the first phase of what I would call the application process, which is your documents, right? Kind of discovering how to make those effective. So when students come in and they're really stressed out, I propose a plan of action, right, that they can or don't have to take, right? They might have their own plan of action. So what I say is like, let's be in the job collection phase. Let's start from scratch, fresh, right? Where we look to find a bucket or collection, right, of certain jobs. A lot of times our students are like, how many should that be, right? Your guess is as good as mine, right? Whatever feels right or manageable, right? I hate putting a number or value on that. The second piece of advice I give to them is trying to organize those jobs or internships they find by job function, right? So you can be a social media manager at a sports firm. You can also do that for a nonprofit educational institution, right? But that job function is the same, right? So no matter what industry you're working in, trying to group the internships or jobs you've collected by function, right? So maybe you find at the end of the day, you're really interested in working in 3 or 4 different job functions, right? My next step to them is let's not overcomplicate, right? Maybe we have 3 or 4, right? Depending on how many functions, types of resumes, right? That are directly applicable to that area that we want to work, right? So not every time we find a new job or internships do we have to go back and fix our resume. We have a resume that covers social media or is at least 90% of the way there, right? So I always try to say, if you're up for it, right, this could be a strategy that could help you in the long term. So you're not always feeling like you have to reinvent the wheel every time there's an internship or a job that you have to apply for, right? But again, this always goes back to like, are they in the mindset to handle this? And maybe they will be after I send them off to Soleil. So, yeah. Anyone have anything else to add to that specific scenario?
No, I think now would be a great time, just looking at the time, to open it up to other questions.
So I don't see any questions in the chat, and I don't think Michael has had a second to check out the Q&A section quite yet. Oh, there he is.
We don't have anything new in the Q&A section either.
Okay, no worries. We do have one more scenario, Michael. Do you think we have enough time to kind of cover that briefly?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So last but not least, right? Students often struggle with one of the following things. I have an offer, but I haven't heard back from anywhere else yet. Do I take it? What should I do? Right? I have 2 offers, but I'm not sure how to determine which one is better, right? I have a tight deadline on an offer to accept, but it's giving me anxiety. How do we talk with our students about these 3 different kind of obstacles that they might face when it comes time to accept a job? I do realize we talked a little bit about this, the second one here, right? About how to determine which job is better. So if our panel wants to focus on, you know, either I have an offer, but I haven't heard back from anywhere else, or having this tight deadline that's giving me anxiety. So if you have any comments here, would love to hear your feedback.
Yeah. So, I think for as staff, and when we hear students telling us about this kind of anxieties, I think it's best to use our listening skills and really not focus only on what they say, but also focus on what they haven't said. For example, maybe the students, they have those kind of struggle because they haven't found the perfect job offer yet. So maybe it's a time, if that's the case, it's a time to seek help from the career services and explore how to apply for the job they really want. Or maybe it's another scenario is that they are afraid to make the wrong decisions, and they are afraid that this wrong decision might ruin their life in the future. So in this case, maybe it's best to refer the students to the counseling services or the peer wellness coaching services, so they can talk to someone and really voice out their concerns and their worries, so that they can get rid of the roadblock before they move on. So there's always something behind the surface. So I really encourage us to use the active listening skills. Don't give any prejudgment, but really try to understand what's not saying from the student.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think being an active listener is really key here, especially when you think about reaching out. And I also think letting them know what the options are to navigate it, once they feel like they've been heard. So a lot of times students don't know that, yeah, you can send an email to follow up to an employer and ask, where you are in the timeline. You can let another employer know there are professional ways to say, I'm still very interested in XYZ. This is my top choice. I do want to let you know I have another competing offer. on the table. I wanted to check in about where I am in the application process, or if that status can be moved up. There are things that we can talk to them about at Career Services in terms of how to approach that conversation professionally, because a lot of times they don't know that they can do that. They think that might impact their application, or they think they're being too annoying to the recruiter, the hiring manager, whoever they're talking to. So I think a large part of when I have those conversations is normalizing it. Yes, this is something people do. It's a professional thing to do. And we can help you craft that email in terms of how to talk to it, talk to someone about it. And then once those emails are sent, it's really, we're waiting to see, like, can they expedite your application? Okay, well, if the answer is no, then we're kind of back to this other decision of, all right, I do need to make this decision before I have all the pieces that I wanted. But we don't know that until we ask first. So oftentimes I try to let students know that, like, yeah, you're really anxious about this. I get that. It's hard to make these decisions, but we don't even know what the answers are yet. So let's get some answers, gather some more data for ourselves before we then continue to move forward and think about the what ifs. So I know that's an approach I like to take for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a comment drop into the chat as well as a question in the Q&A. So I think I'll start with Scott's comment, if that's okay. So it says, in my experience, many, if not most students don't feel like they can or should negotiate or push back on employers around things like timing of interviews. They'll happily miss class so they can take an interview or explore like exploding offers. Is it reasonable to expect that students can and sometimes should try to negotiate certain things that would be with would-be employers? Are there legit third rail topics that students shouldn't address? Okay, yeah, so I think this is a great question that's really connected to what we just talked about. Megan, would you be okay to kind of jump in and lead the discussion here?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, we always, if we're talking to a student, we always let them know that class is a priority, and that we will help them talk to their employer about that. And many times if the student is just clear with when that class time is, many employers are okay to make a change for that for them. I think a lot of times when employers might not be as willing to change is if a student reaches out and is just like, I'm busy during that time. Can I have another time? Well, no, let them know. Like, I have a lab scheduled from 1 to 4 every Tuesday for my XYZ class. Unfortunately, that interview time does not work for me. However, these are the blocks of time I am free. And so I just wanted to put that out there, kind of addressing that first point about like missing class. I think in terms of exploding offers, that's definitely tricky. We do have, and I'm not sure if everyone, all staff here are aware, on our Penn Career Services website, maybe someone can throw that, one of my colleagues can throw it in the chat, a general recommendation that we as Career Services recommend to employers regarding offer timelines for students. Now, unfortunately, there's no way for us to, keep employers accountable. Unfortunately, that's just not in our capacity, but it is a good starting point for students to begin to have those conversations and saying, here is the Penn Career Services, what they strongly recommend in terms of hiring timelines. I want to direct you to here, and students can direct the employer to the website. Sometimes that can help employers kind of be a little bit more understanding with timelines for offers, and that's definitely a tool I encourage students to use or share with employers. I think to the other point though, exploding offers, sometimes it is just an exploding offer, especially with those competitive industries. And with those, I think you can still always ask, like, I know you gave this offer to me Wednesday, you want an answer Friday, but then they follow up Thursday. I would say, like, hey, let them know that you are needing some more time to think about this. You can always ask. Yeah, they might say no, and then we kind of have to have a different conversation, but you can always ask. I think the third rail topics that students shouldn't address is never to tell another employer specifically where else you're applying, especially if it's in the same industry. Like, let's say you're looking at investment banking, you know, a lot of those employers talk to each other, right? So you don't want your current process somewhere to be influenced by someone at another place going over and saying like, oh, XYZ is also interested in this. So I think in those particular situations, those are things that students shouldn't touch. But I think in terms of asking for an extension, you can always ask for an extension. They might say no, but you can always ask. You can always point them to our strongly recommended policies on the Penn Career Services website, etc. So sorry, that was a lot, but I'll open it up to anyone else.
No, yeah, all good information. I think when I meet with students, it's really important for me to say, or like help them find the words, right, to explain why they might need an extension of time or what they might need in an offer negotiation. So for instance, right, some of the language I might give them is, I am so excited about this offer. I'm really looking forward to exploring, right, this offer more. Unfortunately, as it's the end of the year and I'm engaged in finals, etc., whatever, I don't feel that this is an appropriate amount of time for me to adequately explore, right, this offer, right? And kind of like reframing it to say like, this is something I really want to invest my time and attention into, but I just don't have the capacity to do that within the 24 hours that you've given me to respond, right? So I think sometimes that's helpful for students to be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's actually very true. You know, I'd be reading this at 1 a.m., right? So how do we say that in a way that will resonate with the employer? Looks like there's a question in the chat as well as one in the Q&A.
Can I jump in real quick on this last topic?
Yeah.
Just because myself and Barbara Hewitt, our executive director, and our director of on-campus recruiting, Jackie, have worked with the undergraduate assembly this past year on this topic specifically, and trying to come up with some guidance on how students can engage with employers about schedule conflicts and also with their professors. And so we have a resource. In fact, I was just speaking with Jackie about it this morning. We're hoping to have that up on our website very shortly so that it's in place for the fall. But it is something that we talk to students about all the time. And so we finally were like, you know what, this needs to be its own section of the website so that if students need some advice on how to craft those emails, because in talking with the students, trying to simply write an email to either their professor or the employers or people they felt had power over them was a stressor in itself. So we tried to provide them with some language that could help them. But everything else, of course, that you said is right on point. It never hurts to ask. They still might say no, and then you have to make some decisions. So yes, I think we do have time for one more question. And it was, when students graduate, do they immediately lose access to wellness and counseling service, or is there a grace period?
For this question, I'm not 100% sure. So based on what I know, students have until June 30th, but I'm not quite sure. So let me double check with my colleagues.
And as far as career counseling goes, for students served by our office, Penn Career Services, we actually offer alumni services for life. So you never lose access. So that is at least one area that you can continue to use as an alum forever. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank all our panelists. This has been an amazing conversation. We could definitely keep it going, but we have one more session today. In about 20 minutes, we'll be talking about using transferable skills and highlighting your campus experience on your resume or CV with my colleagues, Natty and Dustin. And of course, I want to invite everyone over to the Career Services office in the McNeil building at 3:45 for the rest of the afternoon for some refreshments, a chance to meet our staff, a chance to use our professional headshot booth. And I can announce there will be cupcakes at 3:45. So if you need a reason to come on over, that should be it. But thank you, everyone. Thanks for the great conversation. Thank you for the amazing questions. And we'll see you at the next session and hopefully for some cupcakes. Till then, take care. Thanks very much.